Hi, Will Betts from Sound on Sound here at SOS HQ with Chris from Novation. Chris, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Very good indeed.
Excellent. Yeah. And today we're going to be looking at a brand new controller from Novation. So Chris, what's the story with this one?
Well, as you say, we've got our new flagship controller from Novation. It's the SL MkIII, but it's a controller, I would say, with quite a big difference from what you would perhaps expect. Of course, you've got your DAW control, as you would expect from a controller keyboard, but actually it's a completely standalone sequencer as well, and features eight basically parts of 8-voice poly sequencing. And yeah, it's a very powerful sequencer engine directly inside the hardware. So if you're a computer user, of course, it's going to be a great flagship controller for that sort of thing. But if you're more on the hardware side of things, either with MIDI or with CV as well, we can quite happily use that sort of situation in a standalone way as well.
Interesting. Okay. And it's the SL, so the previous version that came out, what, nearly 10 years ago now?
Absolutely. I think, get this probably wrong now, somebody will write in, but I think it was
the SOS review was certainly in June 2009 based on my previous research.
Wow, very good, excellent. Well, thank you for helping me out.
Problem
Yeah,
there,
indeed, yeah. The SL has been around with us for some time. It's always been our flagship controller, and obviously was based around the AutoMap, powerful AutoMap software originally. This time we're not using the AutoMap, but we do have a nice situation where we can create templates. And using component software, we can create our own mappings for our favorite pieces of hardware. In terms of controlling the software side of things, using In Control, we have a dynamic way of being able to follow you around the software, so you can control all of your devices, all of your channel strips and that sort of thing directly from the keyboard.
And that software, is that available in other products so far, or is this a new outing?
In Control was originally developed for the launch key range of keyboards,
right, okay, yeah.
but we've actually sort of taken that to the next level now. Okay. One of the great things about the SL MkIII is we've got our 5 screens as well, so we've got a lot of great feedback coming back from both our hardware and the software aspects as well. So yeah, there's a lot of control, and it's all very visual on the unit as well.
Great, well let's dive in, shall we?
Absolutely, let's take a look. Okay, so we're in front of the SL MkIII now, and we'll take a good look at the sequencer. Before we go into the sequencer itself, just a quick note on what we call parts. And parts are basically our 8 lanes, if you like, or 8 tracks or channels that we have built into the SL MkIII. So if I want to move around the different instruments that I've got here, it's really super simple. I can play the peak and control it with the parameters that are mapped here on the SL. If I want to control the no coast, simply press no coast and just straight into that. Same with the preen here, the preen FM. My auto boom. Now this is actually an interesting one because I've got this connected to 2 devices. I have the MIDI notes going to the SP404 to trigger the MIDI, to trigger the samples, but I'm also controlling the really lovely auto boom analog effects warming unit. With the mapping that I've made for that. Now a mapping is basically what we're calling a template, and I can load into this any template that I like to. So if I go to this last track, which is not one that's connected here, but just to show you, I press Shift and Templates, and now I have a list of 64 different templates that I can choose from, and that will instantly load onto that particular track and then give me all the mappings that I want or that I've created in the template. And that's using the template editor, which is in the Novation component software. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But let's go back to our sequencer. Now, if you're familiar with the way that the circuit sequencer works, you'll be very, very familiar with the SL MkIII as well, because essentially it's the same method of working. There's a few additions to that sequencer. For example, each of the steps here is an 8-note poly step, if you like. I can record up to 8 notes at one time. So if I just press and hold a step here, and then just press a chord on the keyboard, you'll see now I'm getting some red lights here on the LEDs above the keyboard to show me the notes that are sent to that particular step. So I can do the same thing again here. Let's just make another chord here, and then we'll go for a G minor, why not, and then just randomly put another chord in there. Now if I hit play, you'll see that so it's a very basic rhythm, of course, but you get the idea now. I've loaded in the steps into this sequencer. Now, if I want to, I can go to my mute controls up at the top here, and I will just mute that peak part here. So now, if I hit play, we're not going to hear anything. That's fine, because I'm going to concentrate now on recording a little drum sequence as well. I've gone to this particular channel. As I've said, this is connected to 2 devices, so I'm going to get my sample sounds from the SP404. I'm going to use the mapping to control the effects with that. But to load up a quick sort of drum pattern, what you need to do is, again, just press a step and press the key that you want. As I mentioned, it's a poly sequencer, so I can add another sound at any point. So here, I'll put a kick here, and I'll put a snare or clap here. Here I'll put some hi-hat sounds, and again I can use the duplicate button if I want, so I can just duplicate this step here, and again maybe duplicate this step here. So we've got a very basic pattern recorded in now, which is nice, very straightforward, 4 on the floor kind of beat. If I want to, I can add some extra sounds as well, so hit record here, and let's see if I can find another sound. I'll audition first by taking it out of record. Maybe we'll go for another snare somewhere. Okay. Okay, so just a very quick way of doing that. So essentially I can load in via the step by using the keyboard here, or I can just hit the record button. I have my duplicate function as well, and that allows me to obviously duplicate steps as and when I want them. So far we've just created a very basic sequence. Let's unmute the peak now, and again, very basic stuff here. But what would be quite nice if we could start to perhaps automate the stuff. And with the SL MkIII, it's a very powerful way of being able to take control of your hardware devices, because we also have 8 lanes of automation for each of the parts. So for example, if I go back to my peak part here, I'll just hit play again. Here I've got the frequency, the cutoff frequency mapped here. And again, I can hit the record button and make that frequency sweep. I can do the same perhaps with the reverbs. So straight away you can see that we've got a heck of a lot of power here with the sequencing of the notes, but also with the automation of all of the parameters that you've mapped in. So another interesting thing that I've got here is I'm connected directly to this box here. This is an Electron Octatrack, which is a fantastic performance sampler. This works across multiple MIDI channels. So what I've got, the way I've got it connected here is I'm using my second MIDI output on the back of the SL to just send a simple direct feed to this. It's not passing any MIDI on from that. This is almost like a dedicated MIDI output for this device, simply because it's working across all of the channels. I can quickly and easily set up where I want the MIDI routing to go, again from going to my templates page. From the templates page, then I have access to which of the DIN MIDI output ports we have, whether I want to send it out via the USB output as well, or if I'm going to use the CV and gate outputs. So, as I say, the Octatrack is set up to come out of DIN 2. Let's go back to the track, and now on my mapping I've created some mutes here for my Electron Octatrack. I have control over all of the volumes for all of the parts on here, all of the sampler parts, and I've also got a mapping for some of the parameters that are locked in here. So that's a good look at the sequencer aspect and how to program that up on the SL MkIII. But so far we've only really used one pattern. We've only used one pattern for the parts. On the pattern side of things, we actually have 8 patterns available to us. And I can duplicate them across quite easily to manage them. And if I want to, I can chain these patterns together. And I can chain up to 8 patterns together. So that will give me a much longer sequence available. And I can do some interesting things as well. For example, if I go to my options page, I have 3 different pages here. This is on the steps options page, and I have one including pattern, and I can change the resolution or the speed of that particular pattern. So here I've set it right down to a quarter note. This means now that each of these steps represents a quarter note instead of a 16th note, meaning that I can get much more long patterns from from the initial sequence. So if I go back to my patterns page, this one is the first one, this is going to be the long one, and if I chain that to the second one, you'll now see, if I can hear. It's a lot longer a sequence now, and then we go into the second pattern, which is much quicker, because I didn't change the resolution on that one. So the patterns is a very powerful way of being able to manage your arrangements there as well. Another quick point here on the mute and solo section in the sequencer. I have mute switches, and this just allows me to obviously remove notes being sent out to these devices. So effectively we're muting the sequencer. But I also have an interesting way that I can use the solo as well. If I put it into a solo state, obviously we're going to isolate one part, and in this instance it's the no coast part. But whilst that's in solo state, I can actually also make different mappings, or let's say mute switchings, for the different mute groups in there. So I can use this as a powerful way of kind of breaking down to a single instrument, create a new kind of mute group there, and then undo that, and I already have things muted for me. So it's a nice way of being able to manage your arrangement as well. So another really powerful aspect about the SL MkIII is the fact that we can create and manage zones across the keyboard. This is a great way of being able to effectively create your own mappings on the keybed itself for various different instruments. Now, in this particular thing, I have two individual tracks here set up to control some individual instruments on Ableton. So let me just mute everything else out, and if I go to my octa track, I shall also mute out all of the parts that were playing there. And now, if I hit play, when I go to this part, I should have a nice piano sound coming directly from the Ableton software. And when I press this part, I'll have a string sound. So what I want to do is to actually use both of these individual parts connected to some really nice sampled sounds here in Ableton, and actually play them across the keyboard. So if I go to my zones menu, I can then say, okay, let's change this to destination part 6, and I shall just increase the range of the key group there. So I have half the keyboard now given over to part 6 from the sequencer. Part 6 being the string sounds here. If I go back to my zones menu, I'll go to zone 2 now, and this time I'll go from the A flat here all the way up to the top of the keyboard, and I shall put this on the active part 5. I'm going to turn zones 3 and 4 off for the moment, and then we'll actually turn on the zones feature. So I press shift and zones, and now that's on. And now you'll see on my keyboard I have a very distinct layout for the different sounds. So what I will find is that here I should have the string sounds, and here I should have the piano sounds. So it's a really nice way of being able to manage all your instruments in a live situation and setting as well. The zones is a very powerful tool for sound design, of course, because if I go into my zone section here, and we'll go back to zone 1, and this time I'll extend that all the way across the keyboard. Zone 2, I'll extend that down all the way across the keyboard. And now I should be playing both strings and piano at the same time. So again, this is a really quite nice way to design for sound design in terms of, you know, adding different instruments together to make a combination of sounds. There's the zones. A quick note on scales. Scales, again, uses the LED feedback that we have here, and this allows me to basically turn on suggestions, if you like, or actual snapping, a snapping keyboard. So it means that we're going to always play in key. So at the moment, this is set to the default setting, and this is the key of C minor, but I have a number of different scales available. And as you see, as I turn the pot here, you'll see that the notes are changing, and these are basically representing the notes that are available in that particular scale. Let's go to, we're set to a blues scale now, and here you can see it's instantly snapping to this next note. Now I have a number of different things. I can filter the notes out, so the wrong notes are now no longer playable, or I can even just set them so it just displays where the wrong notes are, but they're still available. And that means that we can, you know, we can use this almost as a way of perhaps learning scales and just making sure that we're always in the correct key. Finally, we'll have a quick look at the arpeggiator as well. And on the arpeggiator, this is a very powerful tool because we have it, it's almost like a bit of a sequencer inside a sequencer. So we have our standard arpeggiation kind of patterns, up, down, up and down, random, my favourite one, which is the played mode, and this will follow the order of the notes that I play in, which is quite a nice thing as well. And so we've got, as I say, the usual suspects there. We also have a gate length, so if I just latch this on, I can take it down to a really very short gate length, so we can get some quite nice expressivity out of the arpeggiator just with this control alone. I also have the ability to turn on steps, turn steps on and off. So I can actually build up a little bit of a rhythm there directly from the arpeggiator itself. And of course I can change the length of this as well. So if I go for a strange kind of odd number length, we've got a nice kind of hemiola sound kind of coming through. So the arpeggiator, again, is a very powerful tool. We have a single arpeggiator on here, and we can set that to follow through the parts, so it will follow whichever of the parts I'm choosing, or I can simply select it to just be a dedicated arpeggiator onto one particular part. So we've looked at how the SL is obviously controlling all these hardware devices, but how do we actually create a template, which is the mappings that we use to actually control the parameters of the various different instruments that we have in front of us? Well, we have a piece of software dedicated to doing this. This is called Components. Components is actually the program that we also use to manage our circuit monostation, and the peak synthesizer as well. And the SL MkIII is now featured within the Components program. So this is the Components software loaded into the computer. And as you can see, I've got a number of different things here. I can also retrieve all of the settings from the SL MkIII. That includes my sessions, which are effectively all the songs, if you like, that have been programmed into here, but also the templates as well. And I'll just very quickly show you the template editor, because the template editor is the place that we can actually set up our own mappings in here. And here I'm presented with all of the rotary controls, and I have bank 1 and bank 2. So I can set up to 16 of the rotary pots here with my own choice of CC numbers and actual different types of controller values as well. So for example, we have here CCs, we have NRPNs, we can send notes directly from the pots as well, program change messages, and even song position. We have the same thing for the faders also. On the faders here we have a different list of different things that we can control. So we still have CCs there, NRPNs, program change, but we can also control channel pressure and poly aftertouch using the faders also. Then I can access my buttons, and on the buttons again I have 16 buttons, so I could assign these to switches or whatever I want them to be. The pads, if I go into the grid mode here, these pads now become polyphonic aftertouch pads, and actually that's a very powerful way of controlling different devices as well. And once again I can set that up here in my software by just clicking on pads, and now I can see that I have my standard hit the pad behavior, and then underneath I have the pressure behavior as well, and again we can assign that to various different things. So the Components software is a great way to manage your SL MkIII. You can store all the music that you create on there. You can store that into the cloud on the online version, which would require a Chrome or an Opera browser, or we have a standalone version as well if you prefer to keep everything on your own computer. So that's a look at the hardware, the implementation of all the connectivity via MIDI, via CV, with the automation, and going through the main sequencer and other functions from the controller. But obviously another huge part of what the SL MkIII is about is actually controlling your DAW software. Now in this instance I have it set up directly to Ableton over here. And if I want to access the Ableton controls, I'm just going to simply press In Control. In Control is the method that we use to talk directly to Ableton, and in this instance we have what we call a script level, a script controller mapping directly for Ableton. And this means that it's kind of dynamic. This will follow me around in Ableton, so I don't actually have to go to the computer to control things. Now this of course is available in Ableton, but equally we will have this kind of level of scripting with Reason software, and we're also working very hard on a script for the Logic user as well. Don't worry if you're a Cubase user, a Pro Tools user, or Reaper, or any of the other usual DAWs that you'll find. Basically we'll have a HUI control, which will give us a lot of nice control over the mixer aspect. One of the really powerful things on the SL is, of course, is the fact that we have got we've got our screens here. And we have the 4 screens, and this is giving me great feedback directly from my Ableton Live set. So if I want to just move around on Ableton, you can see, like I'm using the parts in the sequencer, hardware sequencer, I can just simply move around and choose the part that I want. Once again, if I have several devices on a part as well, so for example, I think on this particular track, on this Clips 1 track, I have a number of different devices on there. If I press the options button, I'm now presented with the list of the devices that are on that track, and I can go immediately to those to control them. So here I'll go straight to the glue compressor. The blue hand in Ableton has moved across to the glue compressor. I can come out of there now, and now I have my controls for managing the glue compressor effect. So it's a very straightforward and simple way of being able to move around the software without having to actually go to the computer to control things. Other things to mention, on my section here, I have mute switches. So mute switches, solo switches, so I can isolate tracks doing that. I also have access to my record arms, which is very useful to prepare a track ready to record. And I have a switch to control the monitor settings as well. So I can actually choose whether I'm monitoring the input, set it to auto, or if I'm just turning the monitor off completely. So another controlling feature that we have for the DAW side of things is, of course, being able to control our pans. So from the options page again, I can just obviously control the pans across the whole range of the Ableton Live setup here. I also have access to the sends, and if I have several sends set up, so I have send A here, I can just use the down arrow, and that will allow me to control any of the other sends that we have set up in the Ableton Live set as well. You'll see here we've got a button that says capture, and actually we've integrated the Ableton capture feature directly into the hardware as well. This basically means if I just play some notes and then press the capture button, it's going to create a clip and actually record that in there for me as well. So a very powerful little feature on there in itself. The faders, of course, are going to map directly to your Ableton Live software here. And if I have more than 8 tracks, because we have our 8 faders, I can just use the track button to move along. And once I go beyond number 8, then we're going to have 9 to 16 here. Again, if I want to quickly bank across, I can press the shift button and just bank across those as well. So that's the integration with Ableton Live. As I mentioned earlier, we'll also have deep level integration with Reason and a script level integration with Logic as well. And of course, Cubase, Pro Tools and the usual suspects there will all have the HUI control too. So that's a good look at the new Novation SL MkIII controller keyboard. Obviously, it's a great controller with your DAW setups, but it's equally an incredibly powerful controller for the hardware setups as well. And actually, if you want to bridge those two worlds, it's a really wonderful way of using this as a hub to talk to all of those devices at the same time. And that was my capture sound just playing at the end as well. Nice little blooper there. Maybe I'll just stop that clip.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much indeed. That was a very comprehensive overview.
Thank you.
How much is it going to cost in the SL MkIII and the 61 and the 49?
Yeah, of course. So the two different sizes, the 49 note version in dollars will be $599. The 61 note version will be $699 in dollars. In terms of UK pricing, that should be available now. We're filming a bit ahead of time, so we don't have that just to share at the moment, but by the time this video goes live, that should all be sorted as well. And available soon? In the next few weeks as well, so you should start to see this in stores in the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic. And just noting that it's the Mark III, you've got the 61 and the 49. Yeah. I know in the previous version you had the 25 as well, and also the one with no keys.
0, yes.
At all, yeah. Is there any plan to move into that sort of sizing? That's something that we can always take a look at. At present, we're concentrating on the 49 and the 61 notes. As always, you know, if the demand is there for the other versions, for smaller versions, that's definitely something that we could look at in the future. But for now, yeah, it's the 49 and 61. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thanks a lot.